All right, everyone, just a reminder. So, my name is Russ Sorrells, Kelvin Jones. We are with the Prosthetic and Orthotic Institute in Rock Hill, Pineville, as well as Lancaster, South Carolina. We specialize in prosthetics and orthotics. And what we like to do is go live on a regular basis to communicate about specific components that our patients would be interested in and the most common or frequent questions that we get from our patients. So, Kelvin is our lead clinician, and he is going to talk with us today about some of the criteria that he uses for selecting the appropriate foot for a patient that has a prosthesis. So, Kelvin, um, anything I missed? What did I miss from there, man?
Nothing much. Let's get started. I'm excited about today because we get to drill down and talk specifically about a hot topic with patients that always have questions about what type of prosthetic foot they're using currently or what they can expect to use with their prosthesis. So we're going to dig down deep today in a good education on prosthetic feet.
Wonderful. So let me start with this, Kelvin. You and I have talked about this before. It's a common topic, but what are those main considerations that you think about, that you process in order to determine which foot would be appropriate for a patient?
So certain criteria we look at, number one, when did your amputation occur? How long have you been an amputee? Number two, what were your activities?
I'm sorry to stop you there, but I want to understand. So the reason now, why do you ask that question, or why is that important?
Because if you're a patient who's just going through a new recent amputation, your activity level is going to be minimal compared to where you're eventually going to be with a permanent prosthesis. So we typically will look at whether or not to categorize a patient into going into a preparatory prosthesis, and that could mean the criteria for that are how long were they in the hospital after their amputation. Someone who's been involved in a car accident may require, they're so debilitated and have secondary issues going on with poor cardiovascular health, just debilitated as a result of the accident. Someone who's had a long stay, for instance, having a patient now who's been in the hospital for about 4 to 5 weeks after the amputation due to secondary issues. So I automatically look at that criteria to help me determine where to start with ambulation and walking with that patient and what type of prosthesis to design for them. And the foot is really, in my opinion, the second most important part of the prosthesis, right? So we have the socket we talked about last week just a little
Hmm.
bit.
Yes.
That's number one. That's kind of the car. We got to have a good car that's going to work right, and then uh, designing the tires for that car, right? So we got to have the right type of prosthetic foot for helping with ambulation and handling the terrain and outdoor activities and even indoor activities that a patient may be doing.
That's an interesting way to think about it, right? Because depending on the surfaces that you're driving on, you're going to select a tire for your vehicle that is appropriate, right? If you're an off-roader, you're going to need those big off-road knobby tires in order to uh, navigate the terrain, as opposed to a Corvette where you're going to have more of a grippy, flat type of tire.
That's right. So when we're talking about prosthetic feet today, the the bare minimum or the lower profile feet, lower activity feet, those are the least talked about on the market, and those are the least talked about in marketing aspects for prosthesis. And the reason for that is because, again, the activity level is low. But what do we always see on TV is we see our veterans, we see young kids, whether it's a Shriners commercial or some other um, marketing aspect from what we see with media, is these kids are on high activity prosthetic feet. These veterans are on high activity prosthetic feet. And that's really that's the end result that they get. And reaching that advanced technology and that dynamic response foot that we're going to talk about, that takes a while to get to. You can't start off with that initially. It's like giving your 16-year-old a keys to the Corvette. We gotta get you up and make sure you can drive first before we entrust you with something that's expensive, as we're going to learn about, but also provides the ultimate outcome for you as a patient and helping you achieve your activities.
Okay, excellent. That's great. That's a great description. They're, helpful for us all to understand that it is a progression. That we start with a specific foot that's going to allow us to walk, and then progress up as we get more skilled in wearing our prosthetic device and more comfortable. Then we move up to the more advanced feet, or yeah, prosthetic feet. So let's talk about the first one here. You've got sach is the first type of foot.
Right. So I have specifically set up this presentation today to talk about your activity level and what type of foot that's going to deem you're going to be in, all the way up to the highest activity level. And in our profession, in our industry, and with Medicare and insurance companies, we use a form, we use a format, a platform with what's called a K level. And K levels determine your activity level as an amputee. We have K0 to K4. And so what we're going to do today is cover the prosthetic feet that go from a K4 or K0 level all the way up to a K4. And so as you can see on your screen here, we're going to start with the basic foot. It's a sach foot. And when you're looking at a sach foot, the acronym stands for a solid ankle cushioning heel, excuse me, prosthetic foot. This is very inexpensive in our world in prosthetics, but it's a very generic, dependable foot to allow a patient to get up and begin ambulating. We see this foot fit quite a bit in third world countries because of the expense. It's very low in expense, but it also provides a patient the ability to get up and to start ambulating at a very minimal requirement. They're not going to break any land speed records. I tell my patients this foot is designed specifically to allow you to get up as a user and begin walking and rehab and therapy. It's a great foot to start that with. And I never have a patient who calls our office for an appointment, who reaches us on our website and talks about, I would really like to try out a sach foot. Why? Because it's the bare minimum. It's basic. It's ideally used for low activity patients. You may see this foot used quite a bit on folks who are just beginning to ambulate, just beginning to walk on a prosthesis. So that's the criteria for the sach foot.
Okay.
Next, we're going to talk about, go ahead, do you have a question, Russ?
Yeah, so you mentioned in this or on this screen are some of the disadvantages. Could you talk about those?
Yeah, so it's rigid. I'm holding one of these up actually right now, two of these actually. And you can see, so the biggest negative that I see with this prosthetic foot is that it does not provide any dynamic energy return. It provides no multiaxial components, which we're going to talk about with different feet. But with this basic sach feet, again, it's heavy. That's a negative. And so you don't know what you don't know, right? So our patients don't know that this is a heavy foot until they go from a preparatory prosthesis into a permanent prosthesis, and they get to be educated on carbon graphite, multiaxial components, and how those work. So the basic sach foot here, if there is a disadvantage, it's that it's heavy. It's somewhat waterproof. This guy here is a little water resistant. This guy here is not. It's a sponge in all reality. And it's always neat to see your patient go from wearing a sach foot to one of the more dynamic response feet that we're going to talk about here later in our presentation. So that's really the first prosthetic foot that I introduce folks to whenever I'm doing a lecture or speaking with patients and educating them on this.
Okay, excellent. Go back to your slideshow here. All right.
So we've talked about the sach foot, right? Solid ankle cushioning heel foot, basic prosthetic foot. So if you were in the Vietnam War, for example, you were a veteran, you had an amputation back in the late 70s, early 80s, even into the mid 80s. This is basically what you got as a prosthetic foot, was a sach foot, or even the next foot we're going to talk about, which is a single axis foot. And this is just advantages and disadvantages for our viewers to see. But in short terms, what it means is this. We have this prosthetic foot that's called a single axis foot. And the way that pivots is, as you can see, I put a diagram up in our picture here to the right side on your screen. There's the plantar flexion bumper. What we're trying to achieve here is your patient is trying to get to foot flat. So if you could actually switch to me.
Can you see the arrow? Oops, that I've got. All right, stop share. There we go.
Yeah, so here is a basic single axis foot. When the patients are ambulating and they're landing on their heel, they're landing on the heel of the prosthetic foot. Well, one of the things that increases their confidence and increases their ability to ambulate is the ability to get to what's called foot flat. So if you're wearing a prosthesis, you're ambulating, stepping down the prosthesis, the patient's ability to get all their body weight on a flat foot is really going to boost their confidence and encourage them with ambulation and weight bearing on a prosthesis. So the way we achieve that with a single axis foot is right in the posterior compartment here of the heel is actually a rubber bumper that's compressed when the patient steps down on it. So as they're ambulating, they step down on this, they're allowed to get to plantar flexion, and then they're allowed to get to neutral on the prosthetic foot. Disadvantages of this foot. Again, it's heavy. You can switch back to the slide point presentation.
Okay.
It's heavy. Again, we're going to learn about dynamic response and the features of that. The other features that this is a disadvantage for is that it's largely been surpassed by new technology. This can come in stainless steel. It can also come in aluminum and titanium as well. Most body weights can't exceed 220 pounds with a single axis foot. That's another disadvantage.
Oh, okay, 220 pounds. That's a limit.
Yeah. 220 pounds is typically the threshold with a single axis foot. And so you can see what the disadvantages are. But again, the advantages are, as a new amputee, you're actually able to get up and start ambulating, right? But we know as prosthetists that this is not going to be the end all be all for your prosthetic feet typically. So what we've talked about so far are K1 or K2 level patients. And we're going to have another Facebook live presentation on that, of describing the K levels and helping to educate patients to know what they're wearing and why they're wearing it. But with a single axis foot, we're looking at the K1, low K2 level patient, which means they're a community or a household ambulator only. They may go outside to doctor's appointments. They may be able to go outside and check the mail. They're usually using an assistive device as a walker, as a cane, with a single axis foot. But we also use this again on preparatory prosthesis for young active patients, because again, it allows them to start the ambulation process into weight bearing.
Kelvin, are you seeing the full screen?
I am.
Okay, excellent. I just wanted to make sure it didn't have the, I'm never certain which screen is being displayed, whether it's the PowerPoint that shows the next slide screen or the actual PowerPoint. Okay.
It's actual PowerPoint.
Okay, wonderful.
So next slide.
All right.
So guys, what we're going to dip into now is really some technology advancements in prosthetic feet. And so not to get too deep into human anatomy or how the foot works or how components work, but we're going to talk about multiaxial feet. And so multiaxial feet, if you are watching today, when you're ambulating outside, if you're walking and you notice on your sound side limb, if you're not a bilateral below the knee amputee, if you notice on your sound side limb, when you're walking, you step on a rock, you step on uneven terrain, a pebble, your foot will kind of turn side to side. A lot of us have had sprained ankles as young kids. Typically, when you sprain your ankle, you go into what's called supination, and you turn your foot to the little toe, and you kind of step on a pebble and it twists your ankle. Well, that's called multiaxial, right? And that's our ability to invert, evert, and supinate and pronate inside of our anatomy of the foot. Well, in prosthetics, I want you to now deviate from the sach foot and the single axis foot, which offers straight ahead walking, to now multiaxial. And the benefit of this is having multiaxial components in a prosthetic foot. Let's just say that you have arthritis in your knee of the amputated side. I have a number of patients who have had knee replacements and on their amputated side. And so what we're trying to get here is the multiaxial components of a prosthetic foot would actually allow you to step on that curb, to step on that uneven terrain, to step on the grass. I think about the grass outside. Not all grass is green and plentiful. You have potholes in your yard, not a pothole in your yard, but just a divot in your yard that you're stepping on. How about you guys that play golf? Multiaxial components on a golf course are absolutely needed. How about you ladies that may be walking the track at your local high school or even at the YMCA? Anytime you need to turn and change speeds, navigate uneven terrain, multiaxial component feet are a must for patients. And so when I'm educating the patient on a multiaxial component, I keep those things in mind. Russ, if you can switch over to me, I'll show you an example of a couple of those.
Okay, excellent. So Kelvin, as we are switching over here, tell me the percentage of patients that would use these type of feet. Meaning that, so that you've got the sach foot, you've got the single axis. Is that 60% of patients use those type of feet, or what's that breakdown?
So I'd rather describe it in this category. Probably, it all depends on where you are geographically. That has a lot to do with things.
Okay.
If you are a prosthetist of my profession and you live in San Diego or La Jolla or LA or West Coast, nice weather, Arizona, your chances of having higher activity patients are drastically increased. Here in the Southeast, I know predominantly, as we talked about last week, most of my patients are going to be probably 65 to 70% of our patients have diabetes or some type of vascular issue. As a result, that leads to the amputation. So with that said, predominantly here in the Southeast, I find that our patient population comes in and kind of resides in that K2, K3 level area. That's predominantly where we are. And so to get back to where those feet are, predominantly our patients will be fit with a multiaxial foot, right? And if we have a few folks that we're going to talk about with a dynamic response feet, which is another feature that's offered, but predominantly the K2, K3 area, multiaxial component feet are where people reside. I always sum it up to my patients as this: we want to provide you with a prosthesis that's going to meet 70 to 80% of your activity needs. I just finished up with a gentleman who's a bilateral below knee amputee, and he wears multiaxial feet. He's 41 years old. He runs a construction company, and his biggest complaint to me outside was, I would really appreciate when I go to get on my knees to fix a part or a component on a bulldozer or any machinery I have, it's very difficult with this prosthetic foot. Can we make it more flexible? Well, you got to remember, the more flexible a prosthetic foot is and the more movement it has, we also decrease the amount of energy return that foot's going to give you, right? Until we get into—
What does that mean? What does that mean?
So we're going to talk about energy return in dynamic response feet in our next category.
Okay.
But the multiaxial is, think of multiaxial as strictly the movement of the foot. So this foot's been on the market probably 25 years. This is called a College Park True Step. It is a very good foot to use to explain to patients what multiaxial components mean. And so as you can see, these bumpers that are inside of this prosthetic foot allow a patient to ambulate on uneven terrain, but these bumpers will provide the ability for the foot to actually go to be flexed on the uneven terrain instead of putting the abuse into the residual limb. So you go back to that patient I talked about who's had a knee replacement. You go back to that patient who's dealing with osteoarthritis in their knee. This is very valuable to them to have a multiaxial component because it doesn't put the stress into the residual limb and into the residual limb into the patient's knee. Okay, so we're trying to alleviate as much pain as possible in that knee replacement or in that arthritic knee. And the way we do that is we accommodate that patient with a multiaxial foot. Now, if I have a patient who's very active, meaning active as in playing pickup basketball, running 5Ks, an athlete, a triathlete, I'm going to go least or less toward this category of foot because again, minimal dynamic response, even though it is offered in this foot, it's minimal compared to a true dynamic response foot. So
let me ask this question also, Kelvin. So, and you're going to touch on this in a minute, but from a financial perspective, yeah, obviously you mentioned the sach foot is least expensive. We're stepping up with the single axis, a little more cost associated with this foot, probably middle of the road on cost. How do insurance companies, Medicare, Medicaid, what's their acceptance of these type of feet? How does that get approved?
So great question. That's why we advise, educate, talk to our referral sources, our patients, the physicians who've even done the amputations, and even physical medicine rehab physicians. It is important that they have documentation that coincides with our documentation as clinicians that um, are congruent in talking about what that patient's ambulation levels are, right? What are those activity levels? Because Medicare or private insurance companies all use that as a guideline, right? We have a filter. I just don't buy my kids anything they want because they need it. I have a filter and I ask, well, why do you need it? What's the purpose of it? Is it a want or is it a need?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Medicare, I kind of sum it up and educate our patients the same way. Is it a want or is it a need? So if I have the gentleman who has the construction company and he's using this every day, well, that's a need, right? He needs that type of prosthetic foot to achieve his activities of daily living.
Right.
It allows him to get on with his life and to be back to work. And then we have the patient who has the arthritic conditions in their residual limb. We have the patients who have secondary issues to their sound side limb, right? So we got to remember most of these patients have issues with both limbs. Just because one's amputated, that actually can turn into their good side, for lack of better terms. And so with that said, that documentation is important. Education is important. And speaking more and more to patients about that process has really helped to educate payer sources, insurance companies. So that is key in knowing. As far as expense, you're right. The other reason I'm using this kind of platform to talk about prosthetic feet is we're going from a K0 all the way up to a K4. Well, that also means that we're increasing in the amount these items cost, these prosthetic feet cost from a reimbursement standpoint for insurance companies. So it is key to educate patients on that and how that works.
Okay, so K4 is the highest level of as far as the measurement that they use.
That's correct. K4 is the highest level, and we're gonna have a Facebook Live specifically for K4 or K0 to K4 level patients and educating them on that, because for us as clinicians, it is key and it is very important for our patients to understand how that process works. Especially, I tell my patients all the time that if you get a call from your insurance company, I want you to be able to explain why you have this prosthetic foot. And that is constant communication. That's what we value here at our practice, is educating, communicating to our patients. You got to be nimble and responsive. That's one of our core values, right? And that also means with insurance companies and payer sources is being nimble and responsive, being able to answer their questions.
Yeah,
So,
one of the things that you touched on there that I just wanted to reiterate, I know we talked about it on our call earlier today with the entire POI team, is the importance of the patient being their own advocate, right? So a patient needs to advocate for themselves. We're going to do all we can do, but the reality is that the patients are going to be more likely to get an appropriate device for their needs when they advocate for themselves as opposed to requiring someone else to do that.
that's exactly right. That's a good point. So,
Excellent.
um,
All
so to
right.
stay, before we leave multi-axial feet, I do want to show and explain one other component of a multi-axial foot. So I'm kind of showing you this from the front view of the prosthetic feet. And by the way, if you're out there looking at this today and you're looking at it with a family member, you don't wear a prosthesis, I want you to know that this is the bare minimum. This is the carbon graphite shaft of the foot I'm showing you. Our prosthetic feet all have cosmetic covers. So I wanted to really help educate patients today on the nuts and bolts of how a prosthetic foot works, right?
Mm.
So here is one actual part of the multi-axial component. So as you're looking at this foot from the front, you can imagine landing on the hill and rolling forward. Well, what this specific prosthetic foot offers is what's called a split keel. And what we mean by that is the actual prosthetic foot is split in half. Why is that important? Because as you can see, I'm pressing down here. When I press down, you can see the movement that this prosthetic foot has up and down, right? And so that's important. You can see from this direction as well, when I press down, how the prosthetic toes will accommodate the uneven terrain. That's important as well. That's another multi-axial or supination, pronation component that this prosthetic foot offers. There's several on the market, several different distributors. I have my go-to feet that I like to use depending on the patient's activity. And that's the other cool aspect of this as a clinician is we get to help determine what type of prosthetic foot we get to put that patient out on, right? This is one of my favorites because it not only offers the multi-axial component, it also offers some vertical shock, which is very good for that residual limb. As you can imagine, we talked about last week, the shear forces that are on the residual limb. It's compounded and absorbed through this shock absorption in this prosthetic foot. We'll talk about that a little bit
Let me
later.
ask this question, Kelvin. Now, how long? So, if a patient is utilizing that foot, they get it brand new. How long should they expect that particular foot to last?
So typically, we will look for 3 to 5 years for a prosthetic foot to last. That should be the bare minimum. Most of these folks, most of these distributors, and folks in the industry will give a 3-year warranty on most prosthetic feet. So with that said, we typically educate patients on that. Now, with that said, also there are some caveats. I have a 14-year-old who wears a prosthetic feet or foot, and he breaks it about every 2 years because he's active. He's 14 years old. He plays baseball, youth league baseball, little league baseball. He's active in the community. He's out and about. He doesn't miss any activities. So I know with him, he's typically going to get about 2 years out of a prosthetic foot. But the norm for folks is around 3 to 5 years for most prosthetic feet.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that. All right. So what's next? We'll go back to
So
the
next
slide.
slide.
Okay. All right. Let me find it here. Where are we?
And I think that will be dynamic response feet.
Let's see here. Share this. You'll have to let me know that I'm sharing the proper screen. Is this on the right foot or right screen?
Nope, next slide.
All right.
Perfect.
Wonderful.
So this is good education for a crowd again. As you're learning about these prosthetic feet, so we've talked about sach feet, we've talked about single axis feet, we've talked about multi-axial feet, and now we're going to talk about dynamic response feet. And so I want you to think about this category. Straight ahead energy. I sum it up to our patients this way. Russ, you can go ahead and switch back to me for a second.
Oh, okay.
I sum this up to our patients this way. Dynamic response feet offer straight ahead energy. And what I mean by that is if we have any golfers out in the crowd today, when you're golfing and you're taking the golf club back into the backstroke or backswing, before you come back through the front swing, you're actually storing energy into that golf shaft. And that energy is returned back through the golf ball. Research shows around 95 to 98% of that energy is returned. So you're coiling that energy and it's returning back to you. So compound that and move it over into the prosthetic world. So we have prosthetic feet that will offer the same attributes. So, for example, I have a dynamic response foot here specifically. And again, I'm showing you this prosthetic foot without the foot shell, obviously. As you notice, what's different about these two feet, same companies made these feet, but the foot in my left hand and the foot in my right hand are different in that the left side actually offers a split keel, right? To talk and cover that multi-axial terrain we talked about earlier. The foot we talked about previous, the multi-axial, is going to help you on that uneven terrain. Weed eating your side, your ditch bank, right? I have a number of folks. I got one gentleman who actually puts fencing in for Lowe's. He's on uneven terrain all day. He loves the multi-axial foot because it accommodates that terrain. He's out on farms, out at houses. Dynamic response, which is what we're talking about right now, is a little different. So that energy is in the golf shaft that we talked about is now coiled inside of this carbon graphite that is custom made for each patient's height, weight, activity levels. That's how we determine the layup. All right, so the carbon fiber layup is in this prosthetic foot. We help to determine that as a clinician when we talk to our representatives from these different industries or different distributors. I specifically will have a conversation with them of giving the patient's height, weight, and activity level. Why is that important? Because we don't want a foot for someone like me who's 225 pounds. It's going to have a lot more stiffness to it, right? So I'm going to be what's called maybe a category 4 or 5. If I have a young 70-year-old or a young 60-year-old who is 145 pounds, he's active in his community. He wants to go on walks, but he wants a very lightweight, dynamic response foot. Well, his layup's not going to be anywhere near the strength that mine would be with my body weight and activity level. So those are aspects to keep in mind. One advantage to having dynamic response feet versus having the sach or single axis is this is very lightweight. We're talking minimal weight. We're talking ounces, and ounces to someone who's wearing a prosthesis is a big deal. So I borrowed a couple of different feet here and actually just have one just with the cosmetic shell on it so you can actually see how that works. So you can actually see how the cosmetic shell is just formed over the carbon graphite shaft.
Now,
so
can you take that cosmetic shell off? Because it probably wears.
You can take that off, but as I tell our patients all the time, I don't advise it. Let your clinician do that. That's their job.
Okay.
Why would you have to take that foot shell off? Someone goes to the beach, right? I had this happen just a week ago. Someone went to the beach. They were fiending to get out of the house with all that we have going on with COVID. The beaches opened up. They went to the beach. They got sand, salt water inside their prosthetic shell. If you're a user of a prosthesis, you know when water gets inside this shell and you don't get that out, that's a positive for usually a not so good smell here in about 2 weeks because the water just kind of sits in the shell. Also, the salt water will eat away at the inside of the foot shell. The other aspect of this is inside of most 95% of foot shells is a spectra sock, and the sock is made specifically to protect the foot shell from the carbon graphite. Carbon graphite has no friends when it comes to material against it, right? Eventually, this guy's going to win. This material is going to eat through this foot shell. So we have to remember that whenever you have a prosthetic foot. Do not take the foot shell off. Do not take the spectra sock off, which is against the prosthetic foot. That just leads to a foot shell that's torn and worn, and before you know it, this is worn through the foot shell, and as a result, that's not a good outcome. You have a very ill-fitting prosthetic foot. What's that?
Turns it into a flip-flop.
Somewhat, yeah, and you start making sounds that are not so attractive.
Right. So that foot coils up similar to a recurve bow, right? And so you get the energy, and then you release the energy, and it helps you to move forward. Is that what you were referring to?
Yeah, exactly. So as we move into specialty feet, it'll make more sense with a dynamic response feet, because I want you to consider and think about if you're a user of a prosthesis or you're about to go through an amputation and you're wondering, and this is helping you for education, is Straight ahead movement is what I get with dynamic response. Straight ahead feedback, right?
Okay.
It's meant to be on the highway. It's meant to be going fast with dynamic response feet. Whereas with multi-axial feet, they're the Honda Accord. They're dependable. They'll go anywhere you need. They're not going to be in a 10. They're not going to be in a 0. They're going to hang out around the 4, 5, and 6 area. But here's the caveat. We can now, as we move into the next slide, Russ, we can talk about feet that offer both features. And
it almost seems too, if you couldn't afford those, that you could have the different types.
If you could afford, yes.
Yes.
But the caveat to that is, I sum it up to our patients in this. What if there's a foot out there that offers both, right? It offers both multi-axial components and dynamic response. Well, that's what this split keel is offering you. As you can see the feet on your screen there, the one on the right with the blue ball on top, even though this foot is no longer fabricated in our industry, it is a good example of the blue shock absorber on top and the split keel of the prosthetic foot. So it offers that vertical shock absorption to decrease the amount of forces that are on the residual limb. It also has the multi-axial component that allows you to navigate that uneven terrain, rocks, pebbles, going for a hike. But it also offers the third option, which is the dynamic response, right? So we get the best of all worlds with this type of prosthetic. And as prosthetists and clinicians, we want to ensure that we afford our patients the ability to navigate that uneven terrain, right? I know someone that I have who may be an avid hiker, but he doesn't hike every day, all day. That's what he does once or twice every couple months, right? So we want to make sure that we can accommodate those needs. His everyday work life, he works at Bank of America, and he needs his prosthesis when he's in uptown Charlotte, going up and down stairwells, navigating Tryon, and aspects of territory like that. So we have to keep all those aspects in mind so that, yeah, we do have feet that offer all three categories: shock technology, dynamic response, and multi-axial components.
Now, do you have to be a K4 level in order to justify this with your insurance company?
Typically, you have to be at least a K3 level.
Okay.
You have to have the ability to change speeds in your cadence. You need the ability to walk and ambulate on uneven terrains. You have to have a need for the ability to use a multi-axial dynamic response foot. And all of those aspects lie in that K3 level of activity, K4 level of activity. So yes, good question. And the feet that we're talking about now are specifically designed for that K3, K4 level patient.
Got it. When we're talking about these, I always want to say feets or foots, as we're talking about multiple. So anyway, I don't know if that ever hits you, but do we need to hit the next screen?
If I start saying that, then I'm going to lose confidence from my patient.
Oh gosh. All right.
Yeah, next screen. So this screen I put in specifically for my female patients and female viewers out there, because it never fails. I get a female patient in, and if they have an array of shoes that they wear with different heel heights, this always becomes, can I change shoes, and how often can I change shoes? And it's a great question. You can switch back over to me as we talk about this.
All right.
So the point of heel height adjustable feet, I want to just give you a quick synopsis of it. Is it a benefit? Absolutely, it's a benefit. I have a couple of patients, one young lady I can think of specifically. I think she's got around 23 different pairs of shoes that she wore before her amputation. And she probably, in fact, still wears about 20 of those. And we can't reach the heel height on a couple of pair because they're around 3 inches. But heel height adjustable feet do offer you the ability to put on different shoes to accommodate your heel heights. So as we're looking at that, here on the platform, as you can see, I've got a foot that's flat. And then if I go into a shoe that is a high heel, it's going to require me to go here. And for us as clinicians, that puts us at a disadvantage when we've got to accommodate a shoe here, because I'm not going to get into anatomy and skin breakdown and the physics of what happens when you change shoe height. But it is not a very good practice for you to change shoes that have 1.5 to 2 inch heel height difference and expect to walk in the same alignment that you have currently in your prosthesis. Not feasible. You're going to get skin breakdown. You're going to get distal tibia pain, and you're going to be calling your prosthetist saying, look, my prosthesis it's ill-fitting right now, and I'm not having a lot of fun walking. So I want to iterate to you that, yes, there are heel height feet out there. Let's talk about the advantages are it'll accommodate all your shoes, right? Let's talk about the disadvantages. The disadvantages of that foot are that it does not or offers minimal dynamic response feedback and minimal multiaxial components. Why? Because we've got so many bells and whistles that are on that foot that offers heel height adjustability that we can't offer both. But technology in the past year has increased. Obviously, industries and distributors have caught on to this, and they are now making K3 level feet with multi-axial and dynamic response features, along with multiple heel height adjustments. So they are out there. You can talk to your clinician about that if you're interested. Another disadvantage of heel height adjustable feet is they're typically heavier. When we're looking at a carbon graphite dynamic response foot versus a heel height adjustable foot, that we're talking ounces for us, and we may think here and us who don't have amputations or who don't wear prosthesis, that's not a big deal, but to an amputee that is a big deal. Minimal ounces in weight can make a big deal when you're carrying a prosthesis around 9 to 10 to 12 hours a day. So heel height adjustable feet are out there. They do have K3 level components now. The disadvantages is that they're a little heavier, a little bulkier, sometimes around the ankle component. They're really difficult sometimes to put a cosmetic cover on. So that's another disadvantage of a heel height adjustable foot, but we can meet your needs with those prosthetic feet.
How do you make an adjustment? Is it an Allen wrench, or what is that?
So if you'll go back to our screen, I think I've put up 3 different feet in our presentation. These 3 feet here, so this is 3 different companies that offer heel height adjustable feet. It simply has a mechanism that you press. You can see on the far right side here is a white button that you can press to accommodate your heel height. The one on the far left is probably my favorite heel height adjustable foot because of the weight. It's less in weight and ounces, so it accommodates the patient's residual limb and the weight of carrying a prosthesis around. But again, most of these are push button that allow you to set the height to where you want it in the shoe. And I always teach and educate our patients, we want to have a vertical pylon. The pylon needs to be at a 90-degree angle to the world. Once that heel height adjustment has been made, that's a good starting point. And then you can start to ambulate and wear that prosthetic device.
So essentially what that's doing is it's the ankle is allowing it to pivot, to move the toes down in order to maintain that vertical pylon.
That's exactly right.
You're going to move it forward, but if you when you put that shoe on, but if you make the adjustment, you can. I see.
That's exactly how that would work. Yes.
Okay. All right. Excellent.
All right. So off to our next category of feet. We're going to talk about sports feet or industry-specific feet. I talk about often with our patients. Some of you may be old enough to remember, some of you may not. If you're younger watching this today, that Oscar Pistorius, right? He was the Olympian who was the bilateral below knee amputee. He made some not so good choices a few years back, and he's no longer active in the community. But with that said, he was probably the most prominent amputee who wore sports feet. It's kind of Nike and a different distributors kind of sponsored him, and he kind of helped advance marketing, technology, and it was great for the profession, right? So with that said, he wore what were called cheetah prosthetic feet made by a distributor here in the U.S. Those feet helped him to run really fast and accommodate some really nice records for sprinting. So we're going to talk about prosthetic feet that are sport specific here. So next slide, I think, Russ. Before we start this video, do you have the ability to start this video, Russ, on your side?
I think so.
Yes. So before we start that, we're going to talk about prosthetic feet here. Russ, if you can switch back to me, I'll cover this really quick and we'll get back to this video.
Alrighty.
So I speak to this like I'm teaching a lecture. We've talked about sach feet. We've talked about single axis feet. We've talked about multi-axial feet, dynamic response feet, dynamic response with multi-axial components. Now we're going to move into the heel height we've moved past. We're moving into sports feet or specific prosthetic feet. A lot to take in if you're out there, but this is the nuts and bolts of how these work. So here's a specific running prosthesis that I've made for a gentleman. As you can see, this does not have a foot shell and it won't have a foot shell. I like to educate patients, insurance companies when I speak, referral sources. When we're talking about K3 level, K4 level, this gentleman here that wears this prosthesis, he is a K4 level patient, but it's while he's wearing this prosthesis. He, in everyday life, works at a construction company, and with that, he's a K3 level patient. So in other words, he's wearing his normal daily activity prosthesis that has this type of foot on it. Mm-hmm. It's still a K3 level foot. This is a K4 level foot. This is strictly meant for running, jumping, sprinting, all of the activities that require you to have straight ahead speed. Okay? Dynamic response strictly is what we have here. Not much multi-axial component, as you can tell. On this prosthetic foot, it's one piece of carbon strut. And it's a pretty cool outer space looking item, right? My patients think it's cool. I always enjoy it when I get one of my 80-year-old patients who find us on the internet or call in or come in for a follow-up and they say, I want one of those running legs. It's always neat to have that conversation because when you're in this prosthesis, you're running, right? It's the McLaren or Lamborghini. It's meant to be out on the highway running, and when you're done with it, you put it back in the garage. It's not something that you drive 5 miles every day to get to work with. So this would
unless
be
you're running.
Unless you're running, this would be. This gentleman actually does a lot of F3 activities in the community, so he's super active, jumping, running all the time. He actually broke his last prosthesis in the foot doing ladder runs. So on the football field, that's how he broke the last prosthetic foot. So we're fabricating this for him to get him back up and going. But this is called a nitro, for example. I think you can see that kind of written there on top of this foot.
Yeah.
A lot of different companies make running legs, make running feet. I have another one here. This is actually called the Flex Run Junior. It's kind of cool because it has a Nike sole on the bottom of it. This young man uses this for everyday use. This is my 14-year-old that wears this prosthesis for daily activities. So this is actually cracked and we're replacing it for him. So you've got to be very highly active to get into a prosthetic foot like this. I would like to add that most of the time insurance companies are not going to reimburse or subsidize for you to have a everyday prosthesis, everyday foot, and then allow you to have a running foot as well. Again, this is a bonus. And so for folks who want to go into a running specific prosthesis, I always educate them that the insurance company may not pay for this, they may not help you out, and they have to be prepared. And this is really expensive. This prosthetic foot, specifically with all running feet, you're talking $2 to $5 grand just for the cost of a prosthetic foot.
Wow.
And it's because of the makeup, the matrix, the customization that goes into making these prosthetic feet, the warranty behind it. And because we know that once you go into one of these, you're going to have a 3 to 5 year warranty. So if it breaks in 2.5 years, this is going to be replaced under warranty. So we have to keep all those aspects in mind. So at the end of the day, it's a bonus for the patient. And for us as clinicians, we just have to make sure that we educate our patients on that initially. All right. So that covers, I want you to take a look here at this video while we're getting this going. This is a young lady that I have in a running leg, actually. She doesn't wear this every day. She plays softball. She horseback rides quite a bit. But as you're watching this video, this is just her the first day we put it on. She's running down the hallway. So hopefully everyone's able to view that video. Pretty cool to see this young lady running in this for the first time. She thought it was so cool she wore it to school. First couple of days she had it, and then I think she switched back to her everyday foot, which I've shown you an example of today. But you can kind of see the energy that's coiled in this prosthetic foot, right? And she can go hiking on this. So if I have a patient who's an outdoor avid hiker and they want a running leg as well, this is a very good foot because it has a flat platform on it. So keep that in mind as we're talking about these. So next slide here, Russ, is advanced technology. So now one of the main questions I get as a prosthetist is, tell me about the smart ankle, or tell me about the microprocessor ankle and the microprocessor foot, and how that works and what it's like. I actually have one with me here today, Russ, as an example. On the screen as you're seeing, that was called the Proprio. It's just an example of a microprocessor ankle and foot. What I have with me today is the microprocessor ankle here that's made by, and I've got a stripped down version. I wanted you guys to see this. So I'm actually going to take the foot shell off. And as I remove this foot shell, this patient is very active, so I will tell you that I'm not too sure what I'll find inside here. But with that said, here is this prosthetic foot. So what's cool about this is this. I talked to you earlier about a multiaxial foot, right, with dynamic response. This is the same foot hooked on the bottom of this ankle, right? As you can see, these guys are twins. Here's the difference. This foot has multiaxial dynamic response features, but it also has a microprocessor computer incorporated into it. What's the point of this is that what if we could actually control the amount of dorsiflexion and plantar flexion that a prosthetic foot had? As you can see me operating this from the heel, you can see it actually going into dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. This is controlled by a microprocessor. Here's a charging port. Inside of here are all the components. And what this means, it sums it down to this, just to keep it simple for you out there viewing and for our patients. As soon as I land on the hill and I go into foot flat, there's a microprocessor inside of this computer that actually tells the foot that I can now dorsiflex and allow you to clear. So if you're an amputee out there and you've been walking through the swing phase of your gait pattern, is when you have the most tendency to stub your toe. I'm sure if you are an amputee out there, above or below, you've stubbed your toe at least once. And it's probably led to a fall. Well, this foot here will actually dorsiflex for you with the ability of the microprocessor. I will say that this specific microprocessor ankle has kind of seen its day. I just wanted to use this as an example because the technology has changed. It's in the details of how the prosthetic feet work and how the industry and the market has changed. But the philosophy is the same. We want to allow a patient to have better foot clearance during the swing phase of gait pattern, but we also want to allow, and I'm sure above and below knee amputees will tell you this as well, one of the biggest obstacles for them is going incline and decline ascents. So with that said, as you're going down the hill as a below knee amputee, one of the first things that happens is your knee buckles, right? And you have to engage your quads to stabilize yourself. And typically you will tell your clinician, your prosthetist, that I'm having a lot of pain on my anterior tib when I'm going down the hill. This helps to alleviate that as well, because it allows, again, some plantar flexion for the patient. This as you are an amputee going up an incline, right? The first thing that happens is you step on your prosthesis, and as you get to foot flat, your knee goes into hyperextension, puts a lot of pressure on your kneecap area. This will help to accommodate that because the foot will go into dorsiflexion to accommodate that aspect of it. So this is a really nice feature for advanced technology. Again, Russ, and to our crowd, we're talking these get very expensive. You have to meet criteria to be a candidate for one of these. Again, that K3 level area. These are all been looked at, investigated pretty consistently, and these features are a positive for folks who need this. I find this works very well on folks who, number one, have the ability to charge it. It's just like your cell phone. So a disadvantage, if there is one, is that you do have to charge the microprocessor because of the computer, but it does have lithium-ion batteries that you can charge daily. You can't overcharge it, so that's never an issue.
How long will a normal charge last?
Well, it's a good question. 24 to 36 hours is typically what I tell our patients, but I like to charge it every night because, again, you can't overcharge it, but it would not be fun to wake up one day and your foot's not charged.
Right.
So
Like
another disadvantage is the weight of the microprocessor. But with that said, one of the advantages is that the weight is typically never a topic for the patient because they will gladly trade off the weight of a prosthetic foot for the accommodations that it gives them and for the ability that it gives them to ambulate on uneven terrain and to navigate inclines and declines. So all those aspects are what this microprocessor ankle allows them to have. At the end of the day, it's a great benefit for patients. Again, there is a weight limit on most microprocessor ankles, around 220 to 250. I'm sure that'll change, maybe go up to 275 over the next year or so. And it's just because engineers are designing these to meet the demands. And when it hit the market, that's kind of where we are. That was the threshold. But that's every day is increasing about weight limits and thresholds that this will accommodate. This takes some very stringent and consistent documentation from us as clinicians to document what patient activity levels are. But it is shown to actually help decrease energy expenditure for patients, because if you're an amputee, that's one of our goals, is to decrease the amount of energy you have to use during ambulation. So that's another aspect of the microprocessor ankle. All right.
Excellent.
So while we've got this up, I actually let me see the next screen down, number 17.
This one? Is this 17?
Next.
Oh, 7.
And next. So before we go into this next video here, Russ, I would like for you to switch back to me one more time. Yes.
Sure.
So one of my personal favorite prosthetic feet to fit over the last 3 to 4 years have been hydraulic ankles. And that's an advanced technology that came out. And whenever we as clinicians see these things hit the market, we go, why didn't I think of that? Because we're thinking about constantly how we can help our amputees, how we can help our patients decrease their energy, get back to their activities of daily living, and be more successful than they were, right? I always tell patients that it's always one of the most gratifying parts of my job is to see someone walk the first time when they didn't think they were going to walk. And that is priceless. And so with that said, we're always looking at technology of how do we increase technology? How do we increase and up our game in prosthetics and advancements? So one of my favorite feet, I guess 4 or 5 years now, have been on the market is hydraulic ankles. And so hydraulic ankles are ankles that are simply that, hydraulic. They're through fluids that are controlled with a port. And so if you have an engineering background out there, or you have any mechanical background, you know that with cars, hydraulics, if I open the port, the fluid flows faster. If I close the port tighter, it flows slower. So take that philosophy, put it into a prosthetic ankle. The advantage of a hydraulic ankle versus a microprocessor ankle that we talked about earlier is that with a computer, we have likability that or a likelihood that it's probably going to break down, right? It's going to need stuff fixed on it. And I always tell patients, the less stuff we have, sometimes that's a beneficial thing, especially if you live 2 to 3 hours away from our office. If you are out, you're a farmer, if you're out on construction sites, the less stuff that you have that can break down, the better. That microprocessor ankle, it's not made to break down, of course, but it has a higher tendency to do so. With a hydraulic ankle, we can offer the same benefits of that dorsiflexion and plantar flexion that we've talked about in the microprocessor, except it's controlled with hydraulics instead of being controlled with a microprocessor. So the last foot we'll cover here is this. This is an example of a hydraulic ankle. And, you guys can see this hopefully on your screen. So again, we have multi-axial components here of the foot, but in here we have the hydraulic ankle that's controlled. And as you can see, as I push this ankle here, this patient is actually able to go into plantar flexion and dorsiflexion. And so I kind of have a stripped down version here of another company's hydraulic ankle. This is without a foot shell, but you can actually see when I pull this forward, you kind of see the movement of the ankle. Here's a better view. You kind of see that compress. What does that lead to? Again, dorsiflexion, plantar flexion, more foot flat, more control of the prosthesis, less stress on the residual limb, a smoother gait pattern, and a patient will tell you, I feel like I'm walking on my original foot as close as I ever have.
Right.
Again, something like this. And that's what our goal is ultimately, is to increase your proprioception and to get you back to feeling confident to walk again.
And so if you weren't on last week, proprioception is the feeling, the sense that your prosthetic device is a part of your body. It is a part of your being, and it makes it easier for you to sense where you are in space with your prosthesis. Is
that's exactly right. So the hydraulic ankles offer that. They offer that good proprioceptive feedback. And so we have to keep those things in mind as we're talking and educating our patients on it. So go ahead.
I was going to say, it seems like a disadvantage in that does it respond very quickly? Like it seems like it could restrict the response as opposed to the mechanical or battery controlled ankle. That seems like it would be more responsive than the hydraulic. Is that an issue?
That's a great point, right? So when we're educating patients on this, your response time with hydraulics is controlled through the port and usually a wrench. The response time on microprocessor ankle is controlled with the microprocessor itself that we can customize with a computer, with our phone. Yes, another cool aspect, right? It's technology, it's bells and whistles. So we can more customize that microprocessor ankle to meet your needs and actually provide the patients with the ability to control those as well, because they have the app on their phone that can control that microprocessor feature of the ankle. So we keep all those things in mind as well.
Oh, wow. It's an app on your phone as well.
And all questions that patients ask. So as we go into our last video here, I think second to last, this is a bilateral below knee amputee walking with hydraulic ankles. And I think this is cool. So he's been a patient of mine for about 15 years. And so this is him ambulating bilateral. He uses no assistive devices. And these are hydraulic ankles he's wearing. So you can actually see in the motion of the video of how he's able to get to foot flat sooner. And that is key for him in providing the stability he needs.
Wow. That is pretty cool. Now, what kind of sockets does he have, Kelvin?
He's wearing a pin locking system because he's been in that from day one and doesn't want to change. I have introduced suction to him previously, and he's an old soul who just likes what he's got, and it works well for him. If it works, don't try and change it.
That's right. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right?
So, and then our next video, so this gentleman you're looking at now has been an amputee for 15 years. Our next video is a gentleman who's up for the first time in bilateral below knee prostheses with hydraulic ankles. This was the first day he walked. So you can see the unsteadiness. He's like a newborn colt, right? But he's navigating, and I think so. This video was 2.5 years ago. He now is a power lifter, working out every day and doing his thing. But that's his first day. So you can see just how much motion he has in his ankles as he's able to use his hydraulic feet.
Wow. Very cool.
So that is hopefully a good video for you guys today, just to talk about prosthetic feet, how they work, how they function, the different aspects. So I'll cover once more. We have sach feet, single axis, multi-axis, dynamic response, multi-axis with dynamic response, heel height adjustable, sports specific, advanced technology with hydraulics and microprocessors. So that's kind of the overall umbrella of prosthetic feet, how they work, how they function, how to know if you're a candidate for it, the benefits, the disadvantages. And so hopefully if you have more questions, please reach out to us. We'll gladly answer those. Ask your clinician. They're educated, just like I am in this industry. That's what we do. We study our craft and we know it. So this is prosthetic feet, kind of an overview.
Wow, excellent. Thanks, Kelvin. That was super educational. Who knew that there were so many options? I think that would be overwhelming, but this video definitely helped to break that down and get a better understanding of what might apply depending on, again, your K level. So the next discussion that we have will probably be about K level. So we're going to talk K level, and then we'll talk phantom pains as well. We'll talk about the importance for every amputee, especially new amputees, to get involved with an amputee support group. That's going to be a conversation that we're going to have as well. So any final thoughts, Kelvin, before we sign off?
I would like to add that when we do our K-level conversation, I would invite our patients to any therapist, maybe your doctor that you may know who writes your prescriptions. The K-level is a good educational tool for them to know as well, because we as clinicians sometimes will ask for progress notes from our referral sources to help you as a patient to get what you need. And it's not that they don't want to provide this and they can't. It's just that they're not educated enough on it, and they will gladly provide that for us once they are. And I find out that most of the time the folks that we need our paperwork and progress notes from will greatly provide what we need. It's just getting them the education on it. So the K-level conversation will be good, because it's very important in the process of getting you what you need for your prosthesis.
Yeah, in the meantime, ahead of doing that, we have on our website, poibelieve.com, we've got some documentation that specifically talks to K levels. It's in our blog, and I think it's available for download as well. So what we are doing is continuing to add content to our website, our YouTube channel, this Facebook page, so that we can help to educate our community. We believe that the most important part of our job is educating our referral sources and patients on the different devices that are out there, the K levels, the language, the lingo of the industry. That's a big part of what we're doing.
Absolutely.
So, all right. Well, my name is Russ Sorrells. Obviously, this is Kelvin Jones. He is our lead clinician at the Prosthetic and Orthotic Institute. If you are in the Charlotte, North Carolina area, we would love to serve you. Our email address, our website again is poibelieve.com. So we'll be back same time next week, noon o'clock Eastern time. We're going to be talking about K levels. Invite folks to join us on this Facebook Live. If you would prefer a Zoom link, just reach out to us and we can share that with you as well. And then we'll
Absolutely.
have this as a recording up as well. Okay, my
Thanks,
man.
guys, for showing up.
Absolutely. Thank you. Great job, Kelvin.
See you next
Talk
week.
to y'all soon. Bye-bye.